Hey everyone, so yesterday I saw this tweet that became rather popular by a Sam Coppinger. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Not sure if it's Coppinger or Coppinger. But anyway, unfortunately for him, it became quite a popular tweet. I say unfortunately because it seems that people took issue with it, as did I in many respects, although I will give him a bit of credit for a few things. So I'll go through his list right now and respond to it. First off, he says he doesn't like Ayn Rand. This is okay in my opinion. In fact, something I've always said was that people who criticize libertarians seem to talk about Ayn Rand more than libertarians themselves do. A quick argument as to why I slightly agree with Sam here, not completely but slightly, is this. Murray Rothbard once made a fantastic rebuttal towards those that call the free market the law of the jungle. Rothbard pointed out that the free market is the opposite of the law of the jungle. In the law of the jungle, only the strong survive. The only way to get ahead would be at the expense of someone else. Under the free market, the two main ways of becoming wealthy, besides inheritance and investment, but that's a topic for another time, but the two main ways are providing either a product or a service to your fellow human beings. Only by being a servant to your fellow humans will you enrich yourself in a free market. So I feel that this is a far superior argument to the one that Ayn Rand mostly used, which is that of just selfishness. I don't think she's necessarily wrong, but there were just far better arguments out there to be used. That being said, Sam said he doesn't like her. As I said, there's plenty to not like about Ayn Rand. But as a libertarian, there is still plenty to like. She certainly did well in breaking down the philosophy of liberty on many occasions for interviewers and audiences alike, at a time where no one else was really doing that. So for me, she's not so simple as to say only you don't like her or you do like her. It's a little more complex than that, but I will let Sam slide on this one. So moving on, next Sam Coppinger says he doesn't care much for Rand or Ron Paul. Rand, I can slightly understand that. He's said a few things in the past on foreign policy in particular that I don't care for. But he is certainly one of the better congressmen out there. I do enjoy him standing before Congress and pointing out the utter hypocrisy of Republicans for trying to pass a bloated budget and also for their inability to disassemble the Affordable Care Act. He's one of the few congressmen that actually says things that, as a libertarian, I have no hesitation in supporting. As far as Ron Paul goes, that just doesn't make any sense to me. Ron Paul was a guy who brought the entire liberty movement into the forefront of the country's eyes. He was the guy who injected criticism of the Federal Reserve and central banking back into the national dialogue. He was the guy who would be on CNN and talk about Austrian economics, or why drugs need to be legalized and how the war on drugs causes more problems than it helps. I also looked into a few more of Sam's posts and I found this. His explanation of what led him into libertarianism. Part of it was his irritation with the Republican warmongering. Well, Ron Paul was the one who rubbed Republicans' noses in this. He was the guy who brought that criticism to the forefront, especially during the 2012 presidential campaign. And by the way, in Sam's bio on Twitter, he expressed his support for Bill Weld, which was Gary Johnson's VP pick that was criticized heavily because he was an extremely watered-down libertarian, if you can even call him that. So the support for Bill Weld and the not caring for Ron Paul does not make a lick of sense to me. Sam also said that he doesn't care for Ron Paul because he knowingly exploited racism. I'm not sure if he's talking about the infamous newsletters here. I think I saw him mention that, so maybe he is. But that has been effectively demolished as any serious argument against him so many times. I almost feel like there has to be another reason that Sam would say this, and I'm sure there is. But I will say this, I will actually use Ron Paul to go into the next two things on Sam's list. That of Black Lives Matter, feminism, and I'll throw Jordan Peterson into that too. Despite Sam accusing Ron Paul of racism, Ron Paul actually has a far more logical and effective argument against racism or any other groupthink than anything I've heard from BLM or feminists. Ron Paul criticized racism for simply being a form of collectivism and not judging people as individuals. Ron Paul also went on to say that racists simply believe that because of superficial physical characteristics, one group thinks themselves higher than the other. This is extremely logical and rational, and a far greater argument than what I've heard from any Black Lives Matter protester, which, by the way, the Black Lives Matter and feminism, at this point, is not really a group that's just against racism. It's simply a group with a thinly veiled contempt and vitriol for white people. So you express expressing support for them also makes no sense to me. It is far from a reasonable, logical group that only looks for people to be treated with respect. They are not that. You can easily read their rhetoric, their social media posts, their picket signs, and you will find them to be filled with outright erroneous accusations and bewildering condemnation of all white people for crimes unrelated to your average Caucasian in America today. So his support for Black Lives Matter and feminism, again, seems like good old virtue signaling to me. And as far as Jordan Peterson is concerned, I disagree with some things Peterson says, but you despise him, Sam? Here is a guy who has, beyond a shadow of a doubt, called out the insane rhetoric of the SJW movement. That now famous Cathy Newman interview was a great example of Jordan Peterson being a serious force to be reckoned with. Forget about the fact that Cathy Newman was merely utilizing strawman after strawman argument. Peterson clearly demonstrated fantastic ability to deliver highly precise, logical, and rational arguments. So to say you despise Jordan Peterson, Sam, you are going to have to do far better than that. Okay, on to conspiracy theories. I don't have much to say about this. This is sort of an empty sentiment. It depends on what conspiracy theory you're talking about. Is the Earth flat? No. Is there a push to go to war by politically connected weapons manufacturers? And are prisons interested in keeping the war on drugs going so they can inflate their prison populations and over-bloated budgets? The evidence is absolutely overwhelming for those things, so if you want to call that a conspiracy theory, I don't know how you can say that you despise conspiracy theories. So Sam just said something very precise and imprecise all at once. That's all I've got to say on that one. On to taxation. You don't call it theft? You can be a libertarian and say that taxation is a necessary evil that has to be severely limited. That is possible. But to deny that the term taxation is not simply a euphemism for theft is to deny what those words mean. You give me money or you get thrown into a cage, and if you're persistent enough, eventually we will kill you. How is that not theft? And as far as welfare being socialism, Sam is right and wrong again. Welfare is an aspect of socialism, but it isn't the whole thing. Socialism certainly advocates for the confiscation and redistribution of wealth and private property, which is exactly what welfare is, but socialism has a lot more to it than just that, I admit. So in a way, I would at least agree that I would not be calling someone who thinks welfare as beneficial a socialist. I would need to ask a few more questions. But that being said, welfare is most assuredly in line with the steps socialists would take to bring on their workers' paradise. Okay, now on to watching and trusting CNN. I have no problem with watching CNN, I watch CNN, but trust it? I don't know about that. I have one thing to say. I went to this Sam Coppinger's Facebook page, and I found this. It's a clip of Trump responding to the question about MS-13, that gang that kills and maims innocent people. The clip was from Vice, but the same clip was played on CNN, the news outlet that Sam seems to support and trust. And obviously the question itself is not included in the video, so you're led to believe that Trump was merely talking about all immigrants, which is exactly what Mr. Coppinger's sentiments were in this Facebook post, that Trump was talking about all immigrants. When I first saw this clip, on CNN actually, I immediately looked it up, and it took me all of 3 minutes to find the video, the whole unedited video. And then I watched it, and I realized that CNN was being unbelievably disingenuous and clearly pushing forth a biased and politically motivated agenda and political message. So Sam Coppinger says he trusts CNN? Well, with his reaction to this out-of-context video, I can see why. His judgment is not very good, and it goes without saying, I am not a diehard fan of Trump that defends him at every turn. But I can tell slander when I hear it. Sam Coppinger seems incapable of doing this, and trusts the news organization that engages in it on a constant basis. Okay, and finally, hating the NRA. I don't have really a lot to say about this. I'm not an NRA member, and I don't own a gun. I know the NRA pushes for the protection of the right of the individual to own a gun for their own self-defense. I don't see a problem with this, but I admittedly don't know much about the NRA, but I am very interested in demolishing the terrible arguments made by those who advocate for gun control. But anyway, Sam, do you see what I did there? An organization that I don't know much about, I didn't speak on it. That might be a good lesson for you. Try not to say things when you haven't looked into it. It'll save you from some of the embarrassment that you've had to endure the past few days. Lastly, to Sam Coppinger, don't say fight me in a Twitter post. and then end up muting the thread. It just seems weak, and it doesn't do yourself any favors. Anyway, I saw this on Twitter, and I saw this blowing up a bit, and I wanted to comment on it. That's all for now. Thanks.